All right, welcome everyone to our next session, last before summer. Well, this is summer already. It was actually.
It wasn't before you started setting up.
Okay. Thank you, Nick. So we have two awesome speakers, and actually I got more people than I expected to see, considering John Skeet and some other famous C# guys that I don't remember by name in the next room. But nonetheless, Nick Tune is talking first, and Adam Ralph is talking second. You're sitting right here. Two awesome people, which I have pleasure to meet before this meetup. So we're talking about boundaries on different levels, from the highest to the lowest, almost. So the highest level is first, and the lower level is next. Practicalities. Bathroom, you've seen toilets on the way here, and so that's the only thing I know about it. So you probably know more than me. There will be probably no food more. So if you want to buy beer, you need to get out of the room and walk all the way through. And what else?
Maybe something positive now.
We have a break in the middle of the talk, so you have 45 minutes.
We have a break. We've got something to look forward to.
Yes. It is very positive thing. So then here we go, and after this meetup, there will be a long break for like a couple of months, because I'm not going to do anything. And if you want to do something, you have to do it on your own. Just let me know. Okay, Nick.
Right, I think, have we definitely started now? Everything's all switched on, all the cables in the right places, lights blinding me, okay. Sociotechnical architecture patterns. What the hell am I going to try and talk about tonight? So, tonight's talk is inspired by forgetting things. I like to forget things, and my wife doesn't like it when I forget things. When I'm leaving my house for conferences, on average, I'll have to run back from the train station to my house about half the time to collect my passport. My car keys, always lose my house and my car keys. Weirdest place I found them is in the fridge. I don't even know how they got there. I can't even remember putting them there. What else do I forget? And my clothes. So I went to a few conferences last year, and I managed to leave my clothes in the hotel twice. Brand new shirts I bought just for that conference as well. And not just one, multiple of them. And I thought I could go back to Indianapolis and fetch them, but I'll just buy some new shirts. So those are inconvenient moments of forgetting things. But it's not always trivial. Imagine if you were on this plane. The pilots forgot to, they forgot to bring up the landing gear. So they were flying in the skies with the landing gear down, and it was draining all of their petrol, and they had to divert. And the thing I love about this is they realised after they diverted, like, we're losing all this fuel, we have no idea why, let's divert. Oh yeah, the landing gear is still down. So let's not laugh too much, because I think DDD people, we might be forgetting a few things too. So what's the point of strategic DDD? Were you raising your hands or just putting your jumper on? Would you like to answer anyway? What's the point of strategic DDD?
No idea.
No idea. Anyone else?
To find out what to do.
To find out what to do. You're on fire tonight. You should be giving this talk, but I'll give it for you. So, point of strategic DDD is, it's about helping multiple teams to work together. And I still work with a lot of people who talk about DDD, strategic DDD, and they're not really thinking about multiple teams working together. But don't take my word for it. It's in the book. Here's the kind of thing Eric talks about in the book. Strategic DDD is about enabling teams to work together. There's one team per bounded context. Reducing the interdependence of parts. That means bits of software and the teams that own them. Now I've just told you this. If you go back and read that strategic section of DDD, you'll be like, oh my God, it's all about decoupling teams. I can't believe I never realized it. And also, in that section, Eric talked about some patterns of integrating teams and large-scale structure. But he says they're only examples. I'm expecting you people, the DDD community, to go and find some new patterns. So since no one else bothered to do this, that's what I've been doing for the past few years, looking for these strategic patterns. And since it's all about software boundaries and team boundaries, they're socio-technical patterns. But before we look at the patterns, let's just think about the consequences of not spotting common patterns, maybe falling into the same mistake. So you've all just been hired by a massive company, one of the biggest tech companies in the world, and you've moved to the city, and you're all pumped up about this job. You can't wait to get started, but very quickly, you notice the organization has some problems. So you think that, oh, the software architecture, we need to make some changes here. We'll call those guys a particular. The team boundaries, they're not really working either. So you're like, right, I'm not going to quit this job a month after starting. I'm going to try and fix it. So you put a team together and you start investigating these different patterns you can use to organize your software and organize your teams. So some of the problems are work's taking ages to get delivered, teams are constantly blocked and fighting, all the stuff we were talking about in the hallway out there that we're all facing on a daily basis. So the first pattern you look at is activity-oriented architecture. I'm sure most people are familiar with this. We have layers of specialization. The front-end teams focus purely on front-end stuff. They own the front-end tech. They spend 100% of their time doing awesome front-end code. We have the back-end team working on APIs and business rules. Then we have the DBA layer. Database specialists, they spend 110% of their time, even though that's not possible, optimizing databases and queries and organizing their data. We have these layers of speciality. Then you're like, well, this pattern might be causing some of the problems. What if we try and look at some different ways of organizing our architecture? So you start looking at something called a partner-aligned architecture. So this company you're working for builds marketing products. And this particular one you're looking at to start off with is an advertising product, which allows businesses to run advertising campaigns on all different social media networks. Well, not all of them, but Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. And you think, well, what if we have a Facebook team? They own everything about talking to Facebook. And a Twitter team, they own everything about talking to Twitter, and so on, and a couple of internal capabilities. And you're like, yeah, that's kind of different and funky, and we like different and funky tech, so let's try it. And you're like, hang on a minute. Matthias Verret, that famous DDD guy, he told us we have to have at least 3 models. So let's look for one more. Then you look at a capability-aligned architecture. And with this one, it's about slicing up your organization and your software into these vertical capabilities. So in advertising, for example, one capability would be creatives. Creatives are the things you see when you see adverts online, the image, the text, the video, etc. So for example, the creative capability would cut through Facebook creatives, Twitter creatives, LinkedIn creatives, and you'd have all of these verticals. So there wouldn't be one team who owned everything about Facebook. Facebook will be split up and split among these verticals. So, since Alexi didn't bring you any food, I have. Choose one. Which architecture are you going for? Who's going for activity-oriented? Who's going for partner-aligned? If no one puts their hands up now, this is going to be very, very awkward. Who's going for capability-aligned architecture? A little bit awkward. Does anyone who didn't put their hand up at all want to give us a 4th option? Okay, maybe later. So Anyways, you're just about to announce your decision to the company, and then one of the senior sales representatives gives you a phone call. It's like, we need to close a deal for Snapchat. This will bring in millions to the company. We have to close this deal. And that sets you off thinking, oh. So which is the best architecture now? So if we go for activity oriented, well, the front end team will make the Snapchat front end stuff. Back end team will make the back end Snapchat stuff. The DBAs will make the deep Snapchat data. We're going to have those handovers and all the conflicts we have now. Might not be the best architecture. But wait a minute. If we go for partner aligned architecture, we can just have a Snapchat service owned by a Snapchat team, and nothing else in our entire architecture has to change. Wow. So let's take a vote now. Who's going for activity oriented now? Who's going for partner aligned now? Who's going for capabilities now? We're still going for capabilities. Okay? Why are you going for capabilities? Alexi?
Because we have the domain knowledge about specific capability, and it doesn't really matter. Well, it does matter, but we could learn the specific implementation rather quickly. Because gaining domain knowledge about capability takes a lot more time than learning technicalities.
So I want to implement Snapchat, and you're telling me I have to have all these 10 different teams go and implement their own Snapchat pieces.
First there were no 10, just 5.
Well, there are 10 now. This company grows quickly. Okay, let's say there are 7.
Well, maybe not all 10. We need to change something because they could work with something that is not visible on the particular platform. It's something in common. Like if you put ads, then something about ads is completely similar between platforms. It's just the last mile that Adam is going to talk about. It's actually different between those 5 or 4 platforms. So we just need to learn a little bit of API there and put the stuff on.
But let's say
maybe the combination of them.
But let's say I've got some Snapchat work, and every time I want to implement a new Snapchat feature, I have to wait for each one of those teams to implement their own Snapchat piece. That's going to be taking a long time, no?
Yeah, sure.
But I've just had another phone call, and it's the director of product. And he's saying, hang on a minute. Don't get optimizing your system for Snapchat because Facebook makes 95% of our revenue. So we need to keep things optimized for Facebook, which is why we should go with the vertical capabilities, which you all went for anyway. But what's the benefit here? So we have these verticals. We can have all of those working on bits of Facebook in parallel. If we have one Facebook team and they own the Facebook services, the amount of work we can do on Facebook in parallel is that one team. But now, if Facebook is 95% revenue, we can have 95% of our people all working on Facebook in parallel. So that experiment didn't really work. That failed. But the point is, flow is a compromise. And if that company would have said, like, Snapchat is a priority, it might have made sense to have a Snapchat team and a Snapchat service. But the point is, whenever we place these boundaries, we are improving flow in one direction, but we're reducing flow in another. So if we put more teams on Facebook, that means less on Snapchat. And if we align our services with those teams, we've got a limited number of people who can work on Facebook at any one time. So where we put those boundaries affects how work can flow through the organization, the amount we can have in parallel. And what ThoughtWorks found is whenever a piece of work goes out of your team, has to be worked on by multiple teams, the amount of time it takes to complete is an order of magnitude greater. So really, we're talking about those software design principles of cohesion. We want to find things that change together and put a boundary around them. And also, what we learn is that this strategic design stuff not just technical, it's not just economical about managing flow, it's also political. But don't take my word for it. Ask Eric. He said it 15 years ago. If you'd have read that strategic part of the book, you'd already known that. So let's get to these patterns. And here's a pattern. I think they invented this pattern in DDD Netherlands. So they call this an octopus context. So an octopus context is a context in your system that reaches out and touches lots of others. So here's an example for you. Who's heard of GDPR? Who still hasn't cleared their GDPR backlog of emails yet? You're all joking now, but I was talking about GDPR like a year ago, and everyone's like, what's GDPR? And I'm like, you're going to find out very soon. You're going to find out soon. But let's go back to this octopus context. So we've got this one context, reaches out to lots of others. What might be some of the problems here if we've got our teams set up in this way? Contracts. Okay. So you mean if...
Well, they all need to align how they speak to each other. And until only, well, they can deliver contracts to GDPR. The GDPR needs to set requirements what they used to.
Okay.
I'm doing this right now.
Okay, I didn't explain this actually, I forgot a bit. So the way GDPR works is, customer says, delete all my data. GDPR context receives that request and it pings out to all the microservices in your system and says, delete all the data you've got for this customer and then send me a notification back. So that's the contract here.
Contracts and the orchestration and a lot of stuff. It's not that complex. It's a very single piece. But the whole thing is with cost management. But it can be parallel.
Yeah, the business process can work in parallel, but what you're saying about contracts is, if that contract changes, if that Octopus team say, oh, that API sucks, we're going to change it, well, you've now got 10 teams, or was it 7 teams? But you've now got to coordinate all of these 7 teams to roll out that change. And when it's in scenarios like GDPR, it's not even about making money, it's about protecting your company, protecting lots of revenue. So it's very difficult to justify that. When you've got the Octopus team in there saying, we've got an important change, and you've got all of these teams saying, our backlog is like this, we're too busy, we don't have time to negotiate that contract with the Octopus. They can't even say this will make the company X amounts of money. So I think in the case of GDPR, it's quite obvious. You prioritize GDPR over everything. Politics. So as we just talked about, when you see this pattern in an organization, you get a situation where the Octopus in the middle wants to make a change, but these 10 teams all have their own commitments and they're being held to their estimates, and they're like, we're going to have to miss our estimates to help you out. And then you get into escalating it to management, priorities change, 1 minute you're making the change, 1 minute you're not. Lots of meetings to flash out these details, where we need to get everyone in the same room to discuss this new contract. But as Alexi already said, on the technology side, you've got lots of coordination logic here. If you can centralize some of that complexity in the Octopus, you can save 10 teams having to implement it. So when I worked on that GDPR system, one of the proposals was each one of those services will have its own message queue, and the GDPR service will send a message down to the queue. Via a message bus, of course, not directly to the queue. We never do that. Well, then people are like, well, we don't have a queue. We don't really want to set up a queue on our service just for this. What about when we want to spin up a new service and we have to spin up a queue and all the messaging stuff? It's kind of heavyweight. Pardon?
You say send a message and says
But what if we're not? Yeah. What if we're not all using the same technology, etc.? So there are some costs there. Obviously, end service bus minimises them, so they're almost nothing. But not everyone's aware of that, and they don't believe you when you tell them. So again, going back to the first point, what we did was we put the retry logic in the GDPR service, and so each one of those services now just had an API. You call the API, you tell it to delete the data, and you keep polling it until it's deleted it. So we were able to remove some of that duplication into the centralized service. What else we could do is we could use standardized technologies. That way we could just use any service bus everywhere and have a client library that implements 90% of GDPR for you. So you just have a function in your code. That function deletes all the data for one customer. And this is a good example of where designing your contracts up front can be extremely beneficial. I know there's this agile mantra of let's just ship stuff and iterate as we go along, but that stops working when you have lots of different dependencies and people don't want to keep updating their calls to your service using your new format. So those are some of the constraints with the Octopus and patterns like the Octopus where you have lots of dependencies. So I think it's more of an anti-pattern than a pattern, which is what I just said here. So the next pattern is quite a simple pattern. See it all over the place. You just have a boring business process where some concept goes through different stages. This is an example from the UK government working on this service where businesses can submit, they can review the information held about their properties, they can make some changes, and then they can lodge a case to dispute how much tax they pay. It's a boring pattern, but it leads to the other pattern. So yeah, but there are some considerations. So if you know this pattern is happening in your organization, and you know that your company makes money when you get a user through all of these different steps, you need all of those three teams to work together, because if the first few steps are optimizing for only their part of the system, the user might not go all the way through the funnel. And changes may cascade. So if you start collecting some new data at the start of the process, it might require each of the different teams to add that to their contracts too. UI composition, talking about that tonight? Cool, won't say any more then, leave it to the experts. Now here's the interesting bit. So I've seen that boring entity pattern where something goes through different stages a lot, not really interesting, but then I've seen this pattern a few times. It's where you have some concept and it goes through different stages, but at any point it can go back to a previous stage. So I was recently modeling a domain with a travel company. They built software for like airlines and things. And so the first step is, so they have the permissions, they've won the rights, they've bought the contract to fly certain routes like London to Oslo, Oslo to Amsterdam, etc. So the first thing their system does is generates these routes, converts them into journeys, which one plane will fly on. And then it goes to its fleet and works out which plane will fly on that journey, etc. And then it works out which crew members will go on that plane. Now, at any point, any one of those things can change. If the routing data changes, for example, they have to recalculate all their routes. And then they have to recalculate their fleet, which plane will go on each route. And then they have to recalculate their staff. So this is an interesting pattern because it doesn't always tie up with the user journey. So when I've seen this a few times, when it moves from one step to the next, it gets handed over from one user to another. And so companies think, because we have this user who deals with this part, now they own the case. And when it gets thrown back to a different stage, that user still owns the case. No, that user now has to give the case back. So they were drawing it along the lines of the user, but that's not how the business process works. Need to find a better way to explain that. Another pattern I've seen is the circle of life. So we have some concept that just keeps repeating its life cycle. So you register an advert, start making money from it, and then you have oh no, that was a different example. Sorry, this one is different. So you register with the service, you start using their products and making money, and then that data is fed back into the marketing systems, which use that to gain new customers. So that feeds back in keeps the circle working. Next category of patterns. Let's see if I can explain these ones in a more interesting way. Well, I think these are more interesting. So the first one is dog food context. Who knows what a dog food context is? Exactly. So the dog food context is, it's not about making money. It's this context where you're spinning up a team and some services, and you want to gain the experience of using your products, the same experience your customers get. So here's an example. I worked for a music streaming company about 6 years ago now. They had this amazing music platform. Any company could use this platform to build their own version of iTunes. It had music, search, products, catalog, etc. But the company wanted to understand what are the pains our users are feeling using this product? What gaps do we have in our features? What stops them creating something even better than iTunes? So they spun up a dog food context. So one team, one completely separate front end. So it was an activity context. It was a pure front end team. It was an activity context, that pattern none of you wanted to use earlier. So what are some of the, so the economics of this pattern are, it's not about making money. You might lose money when you use a dog food context, but feedback is the goal, so you can use that to improve your main products. But they can grow into a product, and it did in that company. So what might be the politics here? Alexei, you got all the answers. They're all waiting for you now, since you're so eager. They're all scared now because you have such great answers. Okay. Haven't thought of that. I'm going to add that one to my slide. Thank you. So the politics I've noticed is most people want to work on the company's star products and build something that customers enjoy using, makes the company money. This dog food context is kind of an off to the side thing that might not even have that many customers. So it can be hard for people to get motivated. And then we get to the situation where managers use deceptive motivational techniques, telling people their work is more important than it is. Any managers here? Yeah, watch out for those managers. They use deceptive motivational techniques all the time. But we can save this pattern because you get the freedom to use any technology you want in production. In fact, that's the whole point of this context. You want to use different technologies because your customers are. Okay. So in some businesses, it's about having your customers go through a funnel where you try to get them to upgrade. I think Amazon will be an example. Amazon's trying to get you to convert from basic to prime. I guess airlines would be another one where they try and get you to come up with different stages. That doesn't mean we should always align our boundaries with these different customers. But sometimes I've seen companies work that way, and each team is focused on, is the customer we care about, we're going to try and optimize everything for them. But the goal is actually here to lose customers. Like each team's goal is to lose customers to the next stage. So you actually have to to be successful, you have to make less money. So when you come to the end of the month and you say, well, we're making half as much money as last month, it can be kind of weird. But obviously you talk about, well, how many people converted and upgraded? So it's kind of obvious. I'm not saying I've seen this one, but certain teams who work on the special customers might develop a bit of an arrogance. Maybe you've seen that, maybe you haven't. And also, here's an interesting one on the technical side. Where do you actually store the customer data? So if I move from a tier 1 customer to a tier 2 customer, where's my data stored now? Do both teams own it? Is it copied across? Do you use some kind of composition? So that there were different ways to solve that problem. The engagement context. Who knows what this one's all about? Please don't make me pick on Alexi. Please. Okay, I won't pick on him this time. So this one is basically, in some companies, some of your features are just there to draw people in. They're not there to make money. In fact, you might make a loss on them, but you hope they will use your other products while you're there. So this isn't a real example, but it's based on an example that I wanted to anonymize. But basically, there was this process where customers would come in, they would register, and they would get this free service, and this service would help them. I had some like gamification on there, like a fitness tracker, gave them advice about something. So, the more you use the app, the more advice you get and your score goes up. And whilst I'm here, I'll just buy some products from you. So I've seen this quite a lot. This is, the company I'm working for now is an IoT company based in New York. And they have these devices installed on the streets, and they give away all of this free functionality, like check the weather, make free phone calls. What else is on there? Yeah, a bunch of these features. They make a loss on that, but they have advertising displays on them, which makes the money. So that's also an engagement context. Okay, who wants to analyze this pattern? What might be some of the political challenges, maybe? Anyone?
The people who work on premium products, they are not making any money. They consider it as a cost center, and will be always saved from not even resources.
Yeah. So not the company I'm working for now, but at some companies, yeah, it's like, well, this is just the free stuff we give away. Let's spend all our time on the making money stuff. And then once you start doing that, people are like, hang on a minute, we're not adding any features over here. That's really important too. So there's this internal conflict between, well, this makes money to the business, but users actually care about this thing. And so managing those trade-offs internally, I'm not saying it has, but maybe it could get quite heated with different stakeholders having different opinions and you being stuck in the middle. Maybe. Let's talk about some evolutionary patterns now. This is where we go from one pattern to another. So why do we evolve? Basically, in a nutshell, we have a team, they build some software, customers use that software, and then they say, now we want something even better. That's the cycle of evolution. So things tend to grow. And once we get to a certain stage, it's time to split them up into smaller pieces. So who would have a team of 50 developers and think that's healthy? 20? 10? Okay, 5? Okay, so somewhere in between 5 and 20, you would split. That's actually about what I would say too. So, but when we get to that stage, what kind of symptoms do we see? So, I don't know what everyone in the team's working on. I'm constantly context switching. I'm working on this feature, I'm getting pull requests about these features. It's basically because humans don't scale, we can't multitask. That's one of the primary reasons. When we have to split things, how do we split them? So one pattern is, let's create an engagement context. Let's split things based on this stuff makes money, this stuff doesn't make money, let's split them this way. Now there are many different ways you can split things, I'm not going to talk about them. And I just talked about these, but I know stand-ups are boring. But when you're in a team with lots of people, stand-ups are really boring. The amount of time you have to stand there, preparing what you're going to say, is even longer. And then you forget at the end, and you're like, it's worse. Let's look at another pattern. So let's go back to that music company. So early days of the music company, it was all about having an extensive catalogue. If you didn't have music in your catalogue, you don't even have the table stakes to your customers, and they will just go to iTunes. As the company scaled and it drew this amazing music catalogue with all of the world's greatest music, now that became table stakes. And the company says, okay, the market now wants better search and recommendations. People want to have the best music coming to them. They don't want to spend ages searching for it. So now the company says, well, search and recommendations, at the moment, it's just a small part of the discovery team. Now we're going to split those three things out into separate contexts. What's the benefit here? Now we can invest in each one of those separately. We can work on all of those three in parallel and have a dedicated team working on all of those things. And so, yeah, why do we want to slice and scale things? Usually it's the market. Like there's an opportunity in the market to move into an area where you couldn't before. Perhaps you didn't have the time, or that just that part of the market wasn't interesting because the table stakes features weren't there. But then you get to the team issues. And it's like, I know exactly how this feels. Like, wait, we spent all this time on search and recommendation stuff, and now some other team's going to take it and take all the glory for that. I kind of don't feel too happy with that. We get attached to our code. Like, we hate everyone else's code, but we love our own code. And then also on the technical side, you might have the business coming to you saying, yeah, let's split these three things out. Oh, wait a minute. Have you seen that code? It's like crazy spaghetti. It's not easy to separate. So different challenges to face there. Now here's an interesting one. This is about evolving for a different reason. So I don't want to say bad things about the UK government. So working in a company and one team becomes a bottleneck. Like they're this one team and they're this shared service thing, and they've got not just three teams but lots more teams all saying, hey, we're trying to make changes, you need to update. That seems like there's like 4 of us, now like 10 teams asking us to make changes. Our backlog is like this. So they couldn't do it. What was the answer? Scale the team up? Slow the other teams down? Actually, no. We can solve this problem by getting our boundaries right and making sure work doesn't leave the team. So what you notice in these situations is it's about removing a bottleneck. It's about taking this one thing and breaking it up into smaller pieces. And now the example here is rules. I see people getting very attached to a rules context. Let's put all the rules in this one context because
You're reminding me of nightmares. I had this
that's the
company.
best compliment I've ever had. I want to kiss you right now.
I had this company where I worked a couple of years ago, I think 6-7 years ago. We had what they call the Enterprise Service Bus team. And they would
Was it M Service Bus?
Actually, no.
That's why it didn't work.
Yeah, exactly.
It wasn't the pattern, it was the implementation.
And they would have I don't know where this came from, but they would have the capability to manage some sort of rules and policies across multiple things, rules that shouldn't even be there. They didn't even know what they were doing, but they would get daily requests of fix this rule, do this, do that.
Were those rules hard-coded in C++?
They were worse. They were hard-coded in some sort of language inside the bus core, so it was active in huge stuff. It was really hardcore, man.
That's my trump card. And you just beat me with my trump card. Wow. He wins. So yeah, sometimes the answer to our problems of having to coordinate teams is the boundaries are wrong. Now, getting from this to the ideal pattern is very difficult because if you get the change wrong, you've wasted a lot of time making things worse. And you can't always predict up front when you're making big boundary changes if it will work out. It's hard to sell that one, which is why it usually doesn't happen. And you've got to break up a team. People people get used to working with certain people. They like forming relationships with certain people, and now you're telling them, hey, you're going on that team, and not you, you're going on that team. You're staying right where you are. So it's important to, when we start thinking about systems and boundaries, we're affecting people, and that can be the most important factor in many situations. You piss off your best people, or any people, I don't want to piss off any of your people really, but if people lose motivation, all the benefits you get by changing your boundaries, you lose on unhappy people. And again, whenever we talk about breaking stuff up, if your software's not in a maintainable state, which is easy to break up, it's not going to happen anyway. Looks great on PowerPoint, that's it. Now here's the opposite. Here's the slice and merge pattern. This is where we have two teams or multiple teams who are having a significant dependency on each other. And what you notice sometimes is there's a small part in their context and a small part in their context. Those things are coupled. All the other stuff is completely unrelated. And what you can do, pull those things out into a separate context. So obviously, we've now got some of the same considerations to worry about here. Like, we've just created a new team. We've had two teams, and now we've got three. So we might have improved local complexity, but the global complexity is worse. And again, how can you know up front if this will work? You don't. It might take a lot of effort to implement it, and a lot of effort to go back. So I'm not saying jump into these patterns, but I am saying sometimes it's worth it. And again, technical separation may be impossible. But so far we've looked at maybe, how much time do we have? 10 minutes. Let's see how far we get. So we think about team boundaries and bounded contexts, but there's a whole layer above that we don't really talk about too much. And there's layers above that because these ideas of grouping things that change together, it goes all the way down from 2 lines of code into a method, all the way up to a whole division in an organization. This idea of grouping things that are related goes all the way up. And we have to, well, we don't have to, but it makes sense to think about maybe 1 or 2 layers above where you're working now, because the problems may be there. So in this example, we've split this one team up into 3, but now those teams still need to work fairly closely together. And so we want those teams to work more closely than other teams. We don't just want a flat organization with like 200 teams, all peers of each other, because that's crazy global complexity. So we don't really have any standard ways of naming this. I would call it a layer 2 capability, whereas a team is a layer 1, but Spotify like to call things squads and tribes and all that fancy stuff. Anyone here work for Spotify? Okay, that's cool. Please don't tell them.
We have squad.
Oh, of course. Did you implement it? Was it your idea?
Yes. How do you know?
Says on your t-shirt. So yeah, I honestly think this categorization of different levels in a system is extremely useful. So I would say, looking at the standard definitions of business capabilities, I think this definition of a layer 1 is useful, and it gives us a shared vocabulary to talk about things when we're talking about boundaries. So a team, the code they own, their process, and even their culture, that's part of the capability. When we think about boundaries, we're having an impact on all of these things, and all of these things have an impact on our choices. So anyway, what are some of these high-level patterns? So one thing I've seen a few times is organizing by, so one common business model is the 2-sided marketplace. So in this example, it's restaurant bookings. So one part of the business was all about, let's have a bunch of teams who focus on satisfying restaurants, software that works in the restaurant to manage the bookings, etc. And then let's have a bunch of teams who work on the actual the diners, people eating food. Let's build all the software for them. Another approach is market verticals. So trying not to name any companies, I've seen this one quite common. And the problem is, companies like to reorg for the sake of it and move from these different patterns to higher layers. And I never know how they justify it, because it doesn't really seem to solve the problems.
Change is
So,
good.
pardon?
Change is good. That's how.
Yeah, change is good. Mix things up. So, I mean, I talk about these patterns, but I don't really have the insight yet into all these high-level patterns and what we can gain from them and when they're useful. So, yeah, this is kind of a work in progress for me, trying to understand higher levels of an organization. So if you have an interest here, please get in touch. Let's talk about stuff. Another pattern is user journeys. I would say this is more at the L2 layer. So if we were building like an auction site, we might have one theme focused on buy, one theme on sell, user journey, etc. And then we have political values.